My mother's applause from the front row looked like pride, but she wasn't cheering for my degree, she was cheering for the $20,000 loan she had secretly secured using my identity. The plastic conveyor belt at the Target in Prince George's County let out a high-pitched squeal as it jerked forward, moving my laundry detergent and frozen pizzas toward the scanner. It was a Tuesday afternoon, 3 weeks before the biggest day of my life, and the air inside the store smelled like stale popcorn and floor wax. I was calculating whether I had enough in my checking account to treat myself to a Starbucks on the way out when my phone buzzed against my palm. Unknown number. Usually, I ignored these. They were either spam risks or political robocalls. But today, for some reason, my thumb hovered over the green button. Maybe it was the adrenaline of impending graduation, or maybe it was a gut instinct warning me that the quiet phase of my life was about to end. I answered. Hello? Good afternoon, is this Miss Mariah Carter? The voice on the other end was professional, clipped, and terrifyingly official. Speaking, I said, stepping out of the line and maneuvering my cart toward the pharmacy section to get away from the noise of the registers. Who is this? This is Brenda from the Baltimore Credit Union, the woman said. I'm calling to verify the final details of your $22,000 personal loan application before we release the funds. I stopped walking. The world around me seemed to tilt on its axis. The bright fluorescent lights overhead suddenly felt too hot, too bright. I'm sorry. You have the wrong person. I didn't apply for a loan. There was a pause on the line. The sound of typing clicking in the background. Is this Mariah Carter, born July 14th, Social Security ending in 8,892? My stomach dropped through the floor. Yes, that's me. But I never applied for anything. I'm a student. I don't even have a full-time job yet. Well, ma'am, Brenda said, her tone shifting from professional to confused. The application is here. It's fully filled out. It lists a co-signer. Denise Carter, my mother. The air left my lungs. My mother, Denise, and my stepfather, Curtis, lived in a world where appearances were currency, and debt was just a way to keep score. In our house, love was transactional. You were valuable if you brought something to the table, status, money, or something they could brag about to the neighbors. Miss Carter? Brenda asked. Are you still there? I'm here, I whispered, my hand gripping the handle of the shopping cart so hard my knuckles turned white. What? What is the loan for? What did she put on the application? The event reason listed for the funds is graduation expenses and relocation, Brenda read out. A chill crept up my arms, raising goosebumps despite the humidity of the Maryland afternoon. Graduation. My mom had been strangely enthusiastic about the ceremony this year. For weeks, she had been peppering me with questions that I thought were just maternal interest. She asked for the exact timing of the processional. She wanted to know the specific zone where the graduates would be seated. She even asked if I had to sign any final paperwork to get my diploma. I had thought, for the first time in my life, that she was actually proud of me. I thought she wanted to celebrate the fact that her daughter was graduating from the University of Maryland. But now, standing next to a display of vitamins, the puzzle pieces slammed together. She wasn't planning to celebrate me. She was planning to use me. She was using my milestone as a leverage point to secure cash. I didn't authorize this, I said, my voice trembling but gaining strength. I did not sign that application. If my mother's name is on there, she did it without my consent. Do not release those funds. I understand, Brenda said, her voice dropping to a serious whisper. We take fraud allegations very seriously. I'll flag this for the investigation team immediately. I hung up, my hands shaking so badly I nearly dropped the phone. I stood there for a moment, breathing in the scent of rubbing alcohol and cheap candy, trying to process the betrayal. $22,000. They were going to saddle me with 22 grand of debt before I even walked across the stage. Before I could even formulate a plan, my phone lit up again. But it wasn't a call this time. It was a text message. From Mom. Do not ruin this for us. I stared at the screen. She knew. The bank must have notified the cosigner immediately after I flagged the application. Another text popped up. It's just a small loan. You'll be making real money soon anyway. Don't be selfish. And then a third. Family helps family, Mariah. Answer your phone. I looked at the words, blurring through the tears that were starting to well up in my eyes. Mariah. That's who I was to them. The reliable one. The responsible daughter. The one who kept her head down, got good grades, and cleaned up their messes. I was the one who mediated the fights when Curtis spent the rent money on a new lease for a car he couldn't afford. I was the one who bought groceries when the accounts were overdrawn. But this was different. This wasn't asking to borrow $50 until Friday. This was identity theft. This was financial sabotage. My phone started ringing. It was her. The picture on the screen was a selfie of us from 2 Christmases ago, both of us smiling, looking like a happy, normal mother and daughter. It felt like looking at a stranger. I declined the call. I left my cart full of laundry detergent and frozen pizza in the aisle. I walked out of the store, the automatic doors sliding open to the humid heat of the parking lot. I sat in my beat-up Honda Civic, locked the doors, and screamed. I screamed until my throat burned. I screamed for the little girl who just wanted her mom to look at her with pride, not dollar signs in her eyes. I screamed for the years of manipulation I had swallowed because I thought that's what families did. But as the silence settled back into the car, something shifted inside me. The sadness began to curdle into something hotter, sharper. They thought I was the quiet one. They thought I was the pushover who would take the debt, pay it off quietly, and pretend everything was fine just to keep the peace at Thanksgiving. They thought they could mortgage my future to pay for their present. I looked at the date on my dashboard. Graduation was in 3 weeks. I wiped my face, put the car in reverse, and pulled out of the parking spot. They wanted a show? They wanted to make my graduation all about them and their money? Fine. I would give them a show they would never forget. Have you ever had a family member view your success as their own personal ATM? If you are ready to see Mariah take down the people who betrayed her, smash that like button, subscribe to the channel, and comment justice below, along with the city you're watching from. We're just getting started. The week leading up to graduation felt less like a celebration and more like a high-stakes interrogation. I avoided going to the house in Prince George's County, claiming I had final exams and last-minute study sessions, but I couldn't escape the digital leash my parents had on me. They didn't scream about the blocked loan from the credit union. That was the scariest part. After that initial flurry of angry texts, they went silent on the topic, acting as if the attempted fraud had been a simple misunderstanding. Instead, they shifted tactics. They became hunters, sniffing for weakness, looking for another way in. 2 days before the ceremony, my stepfather, Curtis, called me while I was packing up my dorm room. "So, kiddo," he said, his voice syrupy sweet. "We were wondering about the ceremony script. Do you think any of the faculty will say anything special about you on stage? You know, mention your specific GPA or anything?" "I don't know, Curtis," I said, wedging a stack of textbooks into a box. "Why does it matter?" "Just want to know what to record," he lied. I could hear the greed in his voice. He wasn't looking for a memory. He was looking for validation. He wanted to know if my academic standing was high enough to qualify for premium interest rates. Then came the texts from Mom. She didn't ask about my dress or if I was excited. "Does your department give out cash awards with the diploma? Sometimes they announce scholarships publicly. Let me know so I can have the camera ready." They weren't asking about my success, they were checking if I looked profitable. Every conversation felt like a cliffhanger I couldn't escape. I felt like a prize horse being inspected before an auction, not a daughter. But the real blow came the night before the ceremony. I was sitting on the floor of my empty room, staring at my cap and gown hanging on the door. My laptop pinged with a notification. It was 11:30 p.m. Subject: Loan approval. Arlington Financial Services. My heart hammered against my ribs. I opened the email, my hands shaking. "Dear Miss Carter, congratulations. You have been approved for up to $18,000 due to verified academic achievement. Please click below to finalize the deposit." I clicked the link, not to accept, but to see the file. There it was again. My mother's name listed as the primary contact, but this time, it was worse. The application included PDFs of my official transcripts and a screenshot from inside my university student portal. The air left the room. They hadn't just used my social security number this time. They had logged into my private school account. They had used my password, the one I had trustingly written down in the kitchen notebook years ago in case of emergencies, to download my records. They were mining my data to sell my future. That was when the fear burned away. For years, I had been afraid of disappointing them. I had been afraid of their yelling, their guilt trips, their financial chaos. But staring at that screen, seeing my hard-earned grades being used as collateral for a loan I'd never see, something sharper replaced the fear. Anger. Pure, cold, clarifying anger. I didn't call the bank this time. I didn't text my mother. I simply closed the laptop. They wanted to leverage my graduation? They wanted to make this day about what they could get out of me? Fine. I would give them exactly what they deserved. I picked up my phone and dialed a number I had been too scared to call earlier. Dean Whitaker, I said when he answered. I need to talk to you. It's about tomorrow. I need to make a change to the program. The morning of graduation, CQ Stadium was a sea of red, white, black, and gold. The air vibrated with the sound of the marching band practicing the fight song, and thousands of families finding their seats. Everywhere I looked, I saw genuine joy, fathers wiping tears, mothers adjusting caps, siblings holding handmade signs. It made my stomach turn. I stood near the entrance of the tunnel, scanning the crowd. I wasn't looking for love, I was looking for my targets. And then I saw them. They were walking toward the VIP section, looking for all the world like the perfect American family. My mother, Denise, wore a bright yellow dress that screamed for attention. Her hair done up in stiff curls. Curtis was strutting beside her in a suit that strained at the buttons, holding a camcorder like a weapon. My younger half-brother trailed behind them, scrolling on his phone, looking bored. They spotted me and waved. The smiles they plastered onto their faces were so wide, so practiced, they looked like they were auditioning for a sitcom. My mother rushed over, her heels clicking on the concrete. She pulled me into a hug that felt more like a frisking. "Mariah," she squealed, pulling back to look at me. "You look expensive, baby. That gown looks good." Expensive. Not beautiful. Not smart. Expensive. "Hi, Mom," I said, my voice flat. I forced myself not to recoil. I needed them in their seats. I needed them comfortable. "Did you hear anything else about those awards?" Curtis asked, leaning in, his breath smelling of coffee and mints. "Any surprise checks coming our way today?" He winked, as if we were in on a joke together, as if he hadn't tried to steal $18,000 from me less than 24 hours ago. They assumed that because I hadn't screamed at them about the second loan, I hadn't noticed it yet. They thought they were still in the clear. "You'll see everything when I get on stage," I said, managing a tight smile. "I arranged something special. Make sure you're in the front row. I want you to see every detail." My mother's eyes lit up. Greed is a powerful blinder. She didn't see the rage in my eyes. She only heard the promise of a payoff. "We wouldn't miss it for the world," she said, patting my cheek. "Go get 'em, honey. Make us proud. Make us rich," she meant. I watched them walk away, jostling past other parents to claim the best seats in the house. They sat down, right in the center. Front row, cameras ready. I turned and walked into the shadows of the tunnel. Halfway to the staging area, Dean Whitaker was waiting for me. He was a tall, gray-haired man who usually wore a calm expression, but today he looked pale. He was holding a clipboard against his chest like a shield. He looked at me, searching for hesitation. "Are you sure you want to do this, Mariah? Once we start, there's no going back. This isn't just a speech. It's a detonation." I looked back toward the bright opening of the tunnel, where my parents were sitting, eagerly waiting to cash in on my life. "They used my graduation as collateral, Dean," I said, my voice steady for the first time that day. "I'm done hiding. Let's burn it down." He nodded slowly, stepped aside, and gestured toward the stage. "Then let's go." The ceremony itself was an exercise in torture. The sun beat down on the black polyester of our gowns, turning the stadium into a stifling oven. Speakers droned on about limitless futures and integrity, words that felt like ash in my mouth given what I was about to do. From my seat in the third row of the graduates, I had a clear line of sight to my parents. They were restless. Every time a speaker mentioned a grant or an endowment, Curtis's head snapped up like a dog hearing a treat bag open. My mother spent the entire keynote speech texting, barely looking up until the applause started. They weren't here for the ceremony. They were here for the transaction. Finally, the speeches ended. The dean of the college stood at the podium. "Will the candidates for the Bachelor of Arts please rise?" The rustle of thousands of gowns sounded like a sudden wind. We stood. My heart hammered against my ribs so hard I thought it would be audible over the PA system. This was it, the point of no return. We began the slow shuffle toward the stage. The line moved with agonizing slowness. Step, pause, step, pause. With every inch forward, the knot in my stomach tightened. I wiped my sweaty palms on my gown, leaving dark streaks on the fabric. When I reached the bottom of the stairs, I looked up. Dean Whitaker was at the podium, reading names with a rhythmic cadence. He spotted me in the line. His eyes locked onto mine for a fraction of a second, a silent question, a final chance to back out. I set my jaw and stepped onto the stairs. 1, 2, 3. I was on stage. The lights were blindingly bright, creating a halo effect that washed out the crowd. But I knew exactly where they were. Front row. Center. Mariah Carter, Dean Whitaker announced. His voice was steady, but he didn't hand me the diploma cover immediately. He stepped back slightly, leaving the space open. The stadium applauded politely, but above the polite clapping, a shrill scream pierced the air. "That's my baby! That's my girl!" It was my mother. She was standing up, waving her arms frantically, making sure everyone saw her. Curtis was zooming in with the camcorder, a wide, predatory grin on his face. They looked so happy, so proud, so guilty. I walked across the stage. I could feel the eyes of thousands of people on me. I reached the center, where the dean stood. He held out the diploma cover, the prop used for the photo op. I didn't take it. Instead, I sidestepped him. I walked past the handshake, past the photo marker, and went straight to the microphone stand at the front of the stage. The applause faltered. Confusion rippled through the crowd. A low murmur started a sound of collective uncertainty. Students don't give speeches in the middle of the roll call. That wasn't the script. I grabbed the sides of the podium. The metal was cold under my fingers. I leaned into the mic, hearing the high-pitched feedback whine before it settled. "My name is Mariah Carter," I began, my voice trembling but booming through the massive speakers. I looked down, directly into the front row. The smile had vanished from my mother's face. She was frozen, her hands still half raised in a wave that was rapidly dying. Curtis lowered the camera slowly. "And before I take this diploma," I said, "I need to expose something." Every camera tilted toward me. The stadium hushed a heavy, suffocating silence that made the blood roar in my ears. I saw the confused faces of the faculty behind me, but I didn't turn around. My eyes were locked on two people in the front row. "For weeks," I said, my voice echoing off the concrete walls, "someone has been submitting loans in my name. They have been using my social security number, my private transcripts, even this graduation ceremony, as the excuse to secure funds." I took a breath. My hands were shaking, but my voice was iron. I stand here today not just as a graduate, but as a victim of identity theft. And the person stealing my future isn't a stranger. It isn't a hacker. I raised my hand and pointed straight at the woman in the yellow dress. That someone is her, my mother, Denise Carter. Gasps rippled across the bleachers like a physical wave. Thousands of heads turned simultaneously to look at the front row. The giant jumbotron, usually reserved for replays and close-ups of smiling graduates, was now broadcasting my mother's face in high definition. The color drained from her skin. She looked like a trapped animal. For a second, she just stared at me, mouth agape. Then, the shock turned to fury. She shot up from her seat, her chair scraping loudly against the concrete. "Mariah, stop!" she shrieked, her voice cracking. She waved her hands frantically, trying to silence me from 50 feet away. "You're embarrassing us. Get down from there." "No," I said into the mic, my voice booming over her protests. "You embarrassed yourselves when you committed fraud. We did that for the family," she screamed back, abandoning all pretense of decorum. "You ungrateful little—" "Sit down," someone in the crowd yelled. "Let her speak," another parent shouted. Phones were recording everywhere. I saw students whispering, their eyes wide. Parents were staring at my mother with a mixture of horror and judgment. Even the staff on stage froze, unsure if they should cut the mic or let the scene play out. My stepfather, Curtis, tried to grab her arm, his face a mask of panic. He hissed something in her ear, trying to pull her back into her seat, to make themselves small. But Denise yanked away, her eyes wild. She was losing control of the narrative, and she couldn't stand it. "We raised you," she yelled, pointing a shaking finger at me. "We put a roof over your head. You owe us." The entitlement in her voice was the final nail in the coffin. She didn't deny it. She justified it. I looked at her, really looked at her, and felt the last tether of obligation snap. "I don't owe you my credit score," I said, my voice dropping to a dangerous calm that the microphone picked up perfectly. "And I certainly don't owe you my identity." That's when the second major twist detonated. I stepped back from the mic, and Dean Whitaker stepped forward. He wasn't there to escort me off stage. He was there to finish what we started. Dean Whitaker cleared his throat. The sound amplified across the stunned stadium. He adjusted his glasses, looking down at the papers on his clipboard, then directly at the front row. "Thank you, Miss Carter," he said, his voice grave and authoritative. "The university takes the security of our students' data very seriously. Unauthorized access to student portals and the misuse of official academic transcripts is a violation of federal law, as well as university policy." He paused, letting the weight of his words settle over the crowd. "We have documentation," he announced. "We have IP logs confirming access to Miss Carter's student account from a residential address in Prince George's County, and campus security has already contacted the authorities." The word authorities hit the air like a thunderclap. My mother's face went from angry to ashen in a heartbeat. She looked around, suddenly realizing the walls were closing in. 2 uniformed campus police officers were walking down the aisle toward the front row. They weren't running, but their stride was purposeful. "No!" my mother screamed, backing away into the aisle. "You set us up! You set us up!" She turned to Curtis, grabbing the lapels of his cheap suit. "Do something. Tell them." Curtis, the man who was always so quick with a scheme or a sly comment, looked like he wanted to dissolve into the floor. He tried to peel her hands off him. "Denise, calm down. Everyone is watching." "I don't care who is watching," she shrieked, her voice pitching into a manic hysteria. She spun back toward the stage, her eyes locking onto mine. "This isn't fair. We needed that money. You owe us, Mariah. You owe us for everything." The officers reached them. One of them gently but firmly took my mother's arm. "Ma'am, we need you to come with us," the officer said. "Get off me!" she yelled, thrashing against his grip. "My daughter is ungrateful. She's a liar. Tell them, Curtis." But Curtis was already backing away, hands raised in a gesture of surrender. "I didn't sign anything," he stammered, loud enough for the people around him to hear. "It was her idea. Her name is on the apps." The betrayal was immediate and absolute. My mother stopped struggling for a split second, staring at her husband in disbelief. "You coward!" she hissed. "You drove me to the bank." "Ma'am, please," the officer said, tightening his grip. They began to escort her up the aisle. The audience watched in stunned silence, thousands of people witnessing the collapse of her carefully curated image. The proud mother facade had shattered, revealing the desperate, grasping reality underneath. My younger half-brother, who had been sitting silently through the entire exchange, didn't move to help them. He sat frozen in his seat, phone in hand, staring at his parents as they were led away. He looked up at me on stage, his expression unreadable, part shock, part realization. He was seeing them clearly for the first time, too. I watched them go until they disappeared into the stadium tunnel. The exit sign glowed red above the darkness where they vanished. The silence in the stadium was heavy, thick with tension. I turned back to the dean. "Thank you," I whispered. He nodded, a small, sad smile on his face. He picked up the diploma cover from the table. "I believe this belongs to you, Miss Carter." He handed it to me. I took it, feeling the textured leatherette under my fingers. It wasn't just a piece of paper anymore. It was a shield. It was a declaration of independence. I turned back to the crowd, raised the diploma high above my head, and for the first time that day, I smiled. A real smile. The applause that followed wasn't polite. It was thunderous. Walking off that stage felt like waking up from a long, suffocating nightmare. The rest of the ceremony passed in a blur of handshakes and sympathetic whispers from classmates I barely knew, but the adrenaline kept me upright. The real work began the moment I stepped off the field. Campus security was waiting, not to arrest me, but to take my statement. I sat in a small, sterile office in the administration building, still wearing my graduation gown, recounting dates, times, and phone calls, while a detective took notes. Dean Whitaker sat beside me, sliding a thick file folder across the desk. It contained the IP logs, the unauthorized access records, and the affidavit from the financial aid office. It was a fortress of evidence. The consequences for my mother were swift and brutal. The misunderstanding defense didn't hold up against digital footprints. The police opened an official investigation into identity theft and attempted wire fraud. Because the loans involved interstate lenders, federal agencies were notified. Her frantic attempts to spin the narrative collapsed under the weight of hard data. The fallout at home was nuclear. From what my aunt told me, she was the only one still speaking to me. The house in Prince George's County became a war zone. Curtis didn't stick around to support his wife. True to the glimpse I saw on stage, he immediately threw her under the bus to save his own skin. He claimed absolute ignorance, painting himself as another victim of her financial maneuvering. Despite the fact that he had been asking me about scholarship money hours before the ceremony, he moved out 3 days later, filing for separation. My mother, stripped of her allies and her excuses, tried to bombard me with calls. Her voicemails were a chaotic mix of weeping apologies and venomous rage, switching wildly between, "I'm your mother, how could you do this to me?" to "You'll rot for this, you ungrateful brat." I listened to one, saved it as evidence for the detective, and then changed my number. My half-brother, Jason, was the casualty I hadn't quite calculated. He didn't text me. He didn't text them. He just went quiet. I hoped that silence meant he was finally seeing the toxicity for what it was, that he was planning his own escape now that the illusion of our perfect family was shattered. 2 weeks later, I packed the last box into a rental truck. I wasn't going back to Prince George's County. I wasn't going to live in fear of the next credit alert or the next manipulation. I moved into a modest 2-bedroom apartment in Silver Spring with my best friend, Chloe. It wasn't a palace, the radiator clanked, and the view was of a parking lot, but it was mine. I paid the deposit with money I had earned, from a bank account only I could access. The first night in the new apartment, we ordered takeout and sat on the floor among the boxes, drinking cheap wine out of mugs. "You okay?" Chloe asked, handing me a slice of pizza. I looked around the room. There were no hidden agendas here, no secret loan applications, no conditional love that cost $22,000. "Yeah," I breathed, feeling my shoulders drop for the first time in 4 years. "I think I finally am." I started my job in D.C. the following Monday. For the first time, my paycheck went into my account and stayed there. I was building a life that couldn't be leveraged. I thought the war was over. I thought I had won. But silence can be deceptive. The summer heat, in D.C., was oppressive, a thick blanket of humidity that made the air shimmer off the pavement, but I barely noticed. I was too busy enjoying the feeling of safety. My credit report was locked down tight, frozen at all 3 bureaus. I had new bank accounts, new passwords, and a new phone number. I felt like a spy who had successfully defected from a hostile nation. Life fell into a rhythm. I took the metro to my job at a nonprofit in the city, worked hard, and came home to a peaceful apartment. The drama of graduation felt like a distant, surreal memory, something that happened to someone else. The investigation into my mother was proceeding slowly, caught up in bureaucratic red tape, but she was tied up in legal battles and unable to reach me. I started to relax. I stopped checking my credit score every morning. I stopped flinching when my phone buzzed. Then came the letter. It was a Tuesday in August. I grabbed the mail from our small metal box in the lobby on my way up. It was mostly junk coupons for pizza, a flyer for a local dentist, but sandwiched between a utility bill and a magazine was a plain white envelope. No return address, just my name and my new address, typed neatly on a label. Mariah Carter, Apt 4B Silver Spring, MD. I frowned. Very few people had this address. I hadn't even updated my alumni records yet. I tore it open in the elevator. Inside was a single sheet of paper. It wasn't a handwritten note. It was a photocopy of a document. My eyes scanned the page, and the blood in my veins turned to ice. It was a loan application. A new one. Lender, West Creek Capital, Scottsdale, AZ. Amount, $15,000. Applicant, Mariah Carter. Date, August 2nd, 2025. My knees buckled. I leaned against the elevator wall for support. August 2nd? That was 3 days ago. But my credit was frozen. No one could open a new line of credit. I had locked everything down. How was this possible? I looked closer at the document. It wasn't just an application. It was an approval notice. Status. Funds dispersed. I rushed into my apartment. Ignoring Chloe's greeting from the kitchen, I threw my bag on the couch and ripped open my laptop. I logged into the credit monitoring service I had signed up for. Your file is currently frozen. Everything looked fine. Green check marks everywhere. So how? I looked back at the paper in my trembling hands. Then I saw it. At the very bottom, in the section for co-applicant, guarantor, there was a name. But it wasn't Denise Carter. It wasn't Curtis. It was a name I didn't recognize. Jory Calder. Who was Jory Calder? And then I saw the address listed for me on the application. It wasn't my old house in Prince George's County. It wasn't my dorm. It wasn't even my new apartment in Silver Spring. It was an address in Tempe, Arizona. My mind raced. This wasn't just identity theft. This wasn't just my mother trying to score quick cash. This was something else. Someone had created a synthetic identity using my social security number but a different name and address, bypassing the standard checks. And they knew where I lived now. They had sent this to me as a taunt. The envelope had no postmark. It had been hand-delivered. I ran to the window and looked down at the parking lot. It was empty, save for a few parked cars. But the feeling of being watched, the prickling on the back of my neck that I thought I had left behind at graduation, was back, and it was stronger than ever. My mother was in legal hell in Maryland. She couldn't have done this. She didn't have the sophistication, or the contacts in Arizona, meaning someone else, not my mom, still had access to my identity. And whoever it was, they were still out there. This isn't possible, Chloe whispered, reading the document over my shoulder. Your credit is frozen. I watched you do it. The bureau sent confirmation letters. I know, I said, my voice tight. I paced the small living room of our apartment, the cheap laminate flooring creaking under my feet. That's why this is so terrifying. A freeze stops new inquiries. It stops standard loans. But this is a synthetic identity. They didn't just use my credit history. They used my social security number to build a Frankenstein profile with a different name. Jory Calder. I snatched the paper back. And it was hand-delivered, Chloe. That's the part that makes me want to vomit. West Creek Capital is in Arizona. This Jory person is listed in Tempe. But someone walked into this building, in Maryland, and put this in my box. Chloe immediately went to the door, engaging the deadbolt and sliding the chain lock into place. She pulled the blinds shut. We need to call the detective, now. I will, I said, sitting at my laptop. But the police move too slow. They're still building the case against my mother. Whoever did this is fast. They're mocking me. My fingers flew across the keyboard. I typed Jory Calder Tempe, Arizona, into the search bar. A flood of results appeared. Jory Calder wasn't a ghost. She was a real person, or at least, a very convincing digital persona. An Instagram profile showed a woman in her late 20s posing on a boat in Lake Havasu, holding a bottle of champagne. The caption read, "New beginnings. Number blessed. Number debt-free." My stomach churned. That champagne was bought with my credit rating. I dug deeper, looking for a connection. How did a stranger in Arizona get my encrypted data? My mother was in legal limbo. Her assets frozen. Her devices in evidence. She couldn't have set this up from her current position. I looked at the West Creek Capital approval notice again. There was a section for reference contact. It listed a phone number. I pulled out my cell. My thumb hovered over the keypad. "What are you doing?" Chloe asked. "I'm calling the reference," I said. If this is a synthetic fraud ring, they usually use burner phones. But if they're arrogant enough to hand-deliver a taunt to my house. I dialed. The line rang. Once. Twice. Yeah? The voice was male, gruff, impatient. I froze. I knew that voice. It wasn't a stranger. It wasn't a random cybercriminal in a basement in Tempe. It was the voice of a man who had sat in the front row of my graduation. A man who had thrown his wife under the bus the second the police arrived. A man who claimed he didn't sign anything. "Curtis," I whispered. There was a sharp intake of breath on the other end. Then, a low, chilling chuckle. "You always were the smart one, Mariah," my stepfather said. "Took you a little longer than I thought, though. Did you get my housewarming gift?" The room spun. You're doing this? You framed Mom? Your mother was a sledgehammer," Curtis said, his voice dropping to a casual, conversational tone that was more terrifying than any scream. "She made noise. She wanted the glory. I just wanted the cash. I told her the graduation stunt was risky, but she wouldn't listen. Now she's taking the fall, and I have a new business partner in Arizona named Jory." "I'm recording this," I lied, my hand shaking. "Go ahead," he said. "I'm using a burner. And I'm currently 3 states away. But I have friends in Maryland, Mariah. Friends who know where you sleep. So here's the deal. You drop the investigation, you stop talking to that detective, and maybe Jory Calder stops taking out loans in your name. Or, you keep pushing, and I ruin you so thoroughly you won't be able to rent a bike, let alone an apartment." He hung up. I stared at the phone. the silence of the disconnected lines screaming at me. He wasn't just a participant. He was the architect. My mother had been the greedy face of the operation, but Curtis was the brain. He had used her to test the waters, and when she got caught, he cut her loose and took the data with him. Mariah? Chloe asked, her face pale. Who was it? I looked up at her, the fear in my chest hardening into something cold and solid. It was Curtis, I said. He thinks he's safe because he's 3 states away. I grabbed my keys and the file folder Dean Whitaker had given me, the one that contained not just the logs, but the IP addresses. Where are you going? Chloe grabbed my arm. He made one mistake, I said, walking to the door. He thinks I'm still the victim. He thinks I'm just going to call the police and wait. I opened the door. I'm not waiting. I'm going hunting. I didn't fly to Arizona. I didn't have to. When I stepped out of the apartment, I didn't go to the airport. I went to the precinct. Curtis had made one fatal miscalculation in his arrogance. He assumed I was alone. But when I had put the call on speaker, Chloe hadn't just listened, she had hit record on her own phone. We walked into the detective's office with the audio file and the hand-delivered letter. The Maryland police had been frustrated by the lack of physical evidence linking Curtis to my mother's schemes. He had been careful, keeping his name off the paperwork. But on that tape he confessed to everything. The Jory identity. The coercion. The knowledge of the original fraud. Because the new loan involved a bank in Arizona and a victim in Maryland, it wasn't just a local dispute anymore. It was federal wire fraud. The detective made a call to the FBI field office in Phoenix. 3 days later, the news broke. I was sitting at my desk at work when the notification popped up on my phone. Identity theft ring busted in Scottsdale. 3 arrested in multi-state scheme. I clicked the link, my heart pounding. There, in the mugshot gallery, was Curtis. He didn't look smug anymore. He looked disheveled, wearing a drab gray t-shirt, staring into the camera with the eyes of a man who realized he wasn't the genius he thought he was. The article detailed how authorities raided a rental property in Tempe. They found laptops, a stack of fake IDs, and the financial records for Jory Calder, who turned out to be a real woman in California whose photos Curtis had stolen to build the synthetic profile. He wasn't just scamming me. He was running a factory of fraud. My mother, realizing she had been left to rot while Curtis built a new life, turned state's witness against him. She handed over emails, text messages, and a ledger she had kept hidden, detailing every dollar Curtis had forced her to borrow. She was still going to prison, but her testimony ensured Curtis would be going away for a lot longer. The final piece of the puzzle fell into place a month later. I received a letter from the credit bureaus. The inquiry from West Creek Capital had been removed. The Jory alias was dissociated from my file. My credit score was restored to a pristine 780. I drove out to the University of Maryland one last time on a crisp October afternoon. I walked into the stadium, now empty and silent. I stood on the spot where the stage had been, where I had taken the microphone and blown up my life to save my future. It had been the hardest thing I'd ever done. It had cost me my family. It had cost me the illusion of a safety net. But as I stood there, watching the autumn leaves drift across the field, I realized what I had gained. I had a job I loved. I had a best friend who had my back. I had a bank account that no one could touch but me. I pulled my phone out and deleted the contacts for Mom and Curtis. I wasn't Mariah the victim anymore. I wasn't Mariah the bank. I was just Mariah. And for the first time in my life, that was enough. I turned around and walked out of the stadium, leaving the ghosts of my parents behind in the empty bleachers. My real life was waiting, and the bill was finally paid in full.